it is really important to us that this be meaningful. So we all come at it from outcomes assessment. That's kind of the way that we're looking, the lens that we're looking at assessment for this particular thing. We're well aware that this is a predominantly teachers conference, although we do not look at teacher programs only. We look at all programs across the university. So we thought it would be helpful to give a little overview of what Thomas Edison State University is, challenges that we see specific to assessment, and we're going to focus on a couple. So we're going to focus on outcome criterion to artifact, and we'll kind of get into what those words mean to us and sort of what words you might use in lieu of those. Just general outcome measurement. Our approaches, we have some small group opportunities, in this case, everybody together, for us to sort of like talk through a couple examples of these. And really, since we do have a unique university, sort of how we might adapt that to your home and university, or how you can take away meaning from this. Like I said, again, our goal is that from this very broad lens of outcome measurement, whatever aspect of assessment that you find yourself in, that you might pull something from this. So let's see if I can get to work. There we go. So Mary, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I think based a little bit on what I'm seeing in the chat that you may already be familiar with Thomas Edison. But just in case, a little bit of an overview. Thomas Edison is a public institution offering associate's, bachelor's, and graduate degrees. We were founded in 1972 with the express purpose of serving adult students, specifically serving working students, more mature adults. And so at this point, we see an average student age of about 35. We serve over 17,000 students in all 50 states. Almost all of our programs are fully online, with some obvious exceptions. We have a number of nursing programs, and I think we can all agree that we would like our nurses to not be fully educated on the internet. So they do come into campus, but for the most part, we are a completely virtual learning environment. When it comes to degree possibilities for our students, they run the full gamut. So we have over 100 degrees that students can pursue, and we have a bit of a unique model for how that education takes place. So what you see here is what we call the mentor model. And what some people don't know about Thomas Edison is that we don't have faculty in the traditional sense. We have a very robust, centralized academic structure that is led by deans, assistant and associate deans, and our academic council. And the academic council is made up of a variety of deans at various levels, and also of our mentors. Now, mentors take the place of faculty at Thomas Edison. So what does that mean for assessment? It means that a lot of our education and the development of our educational experiences is centralized and therefore takes place with assessment in mind. So we don't have a lot of decentralized faculty who are designing their own courses in the way that they see as best, which can present a whole other host of assessment challenges. So if that's a particular challenge that you have for yourself with faculty at your institution, we'll get into how you can adapt some of our approaches for a more traditional faculty model. But for us, our degree programs, our learning outcomes, the criteria that are associated with those outcomes, all of that gets developed by this centralized academic structure. And our mentors are experts in their subject area who then execute the education as it's designed more centrally. And the assessment that takes place that we're talking about is obviously external to the courses that are taught. Now, mentors do all of the grading and the assessment within their courses. What we do on our end of assessment is very different from grading. we assess the artifacts of student learning with an eye to whether the learning outcomes that were set separately are being achieved in those courses. So it's a bit of a unique model. And as we go through the presentation today, we will work on making sure that you can apply it to your specific situation.
Yeah. And I think the thing, and Elizabeth was going to tackle this, since we do separate grades and outcome scores and that sort of measurement, it is something where we take students' artifacts. I was thinking specifically to when that she was talking about this in the presentation just before, that we have, it's the same artifact. It's not a different artifact. It's just rescored by someone else with only the outcomes in mind. So Elizabeth, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we have subject matter experts that work with us internally to develop courses and assessments within the courses. We have a team of instructional designers and assessment specialists. That's Mark and me, and we develop the courses, and then mentors facilitate those courses. And then at some point, after a course is complete, we gather the student work to run an assessment project. So we wanted to talk for a second about the terminology that we use, since different places use different words to mean the same thing. So just for your information, we'd like to know also whether these are the words you use or if your terminology is different. When we're referring to outcomes, we're referring to program level learning outcomes or institutional. These are the sort of high level, not necessarily measurable statements, but those outcomes are broken down into and composed of criteria, which may also be called performance indicators or indicators. And these are those measurable, observable, specific skills that course assignments ask students to do. And then the artifact is the actual piece of student work, a paper, a presentation, a written assignment of some kind.
So we wanted to stop for a second, and since we only have a few other people, you can use the chat or feel free to make yourself available. But we wanted to know, because it will inform kind of how we frame the next few areas in terms of what terminology you use at your institution. Maybe there are specific levels. So like I said, Elizabeth was referring, we sort of are responsible for all of it, and we sort of segment and look at different things at different times, but we understand that in different places, there might be different priorities in terms of, we don't really measure program, we only measure institutional and so forth. Maybe only a piece of it is your responsibility. So if you have anything that you wanted to sort of add or something that we just said that you're like, wait, are you saying that it's this? I'm looking at the chat right now.
Yeah, it looks like from the chat, you both have program learning outcomes and course learning outcomes. And I would say certainly we have, course learning outcomes. That's part of our course design process, but that's not something at our level. The part of the process that we manage, we don't assess course level outcomes. We are only assessing program level outcomes. So we don't have that added layer.
And to that question, the programs that we have that are designed with assessment in mind, as Elizabeth said, we have, and we understand this is the case everywhere. We have programs that are designed with these program level outcomes in mind, and they're really thoughtful and forward designed. And those course level outcomes, or those course level objectives, we call them, are really stemming right from those program level outcomes. We also retrofit backwards and say like, hey, this program has been going for a really, really long time. And the MAEDL, which we'll use an example, which is one of the few that we have in that sort of educational realm, is one of them where we've been doing it for a really long time, and we're trying to retrofit program level outcomes to courses and course objectives that have existed for a really long time. And sort of that's that discontinuity. Ashley, did you have a question?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I could speak specifically for teacher education. We have program level outcomes that align directly with, let's say, the New Jersey professional standards for teachers. And so we have course embedded assessments that we look to determine if our students are meeting proficiency in relation to those specific professional standards. So in teacher ed, we look at, program wide. But yes, our assessments are embedded into the courses and are aligned to professional standards.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. I think.
Yeah, and sorry.
Yeah, go.
I was going to say, and to what Claudine wrote in the chat, we are also in the middle of a Middle States self-study cycle, so right there with you. And we're on a cycle as well. Our cycle is the goal of our cycle, let's be very clear, is to assess 2 program outcomes per program per year and assess all program outcomes every 3 years. That's the goal. It doesn't always happen that way, but that is the schedule as we have it written. So,
and since this is kind of the way that the conversation seems to be going, this is sort of, you know, our office is responsible for all of the bullets that you see here. We were going to focus on really, honestly, the things that at the top and sort of really go into the weeds on a few of those things. So, you know, we sort of are helping in developing the criteria and the rubrics and the actual element used to score it, and those artifact alignments and that sort of area of alignment. And then if we have time, we were going to talk about sort of how we prepare scores and very similar. It was like this, you know, Elizabeth and I have had this conversation about sort of validity versus reliability when you're talking about scoring subjective things, especially in the context of program level outcomes, and people fixate. And I am also a psychometrician by trade. So it's like people fixate on these very minute numerical differences. And you're like, you're missing the big picture. Yeah. And it's something that we talk about a lot, ironically. And then sort of, you know, project plans and going beyond that. But that was our goal, was to sort of get in the weeds on these first 2, which I think we spend a lot of time agonizing over. And I think the piece that I'm thinking about is sort of, we think of it as sort of this sort of, you know, the outcome to the criteria to the artifact. And we wanted to handle each of these areas of alignment discretely, because we think about them and we spend a lot of time on each of these different things. So things about specific to the element and the criteria and it fitting the outcome. And to the point we were just making, you know, sometimes it's really thoughtful and we can sort of create it before it's ever been out there. And sometimes we're trying to sort of fit it to something that already exists and how clunky that is. But we still try to focus on the measurability, the effectiveness, the clarity of the criteria and the element and the phrasing. Is it distinct from other criteria, which is something that we struggle with a lot? Is it really only addressing one discrete cognitive task? Like, is it reasonable for a subject matter expert to come in, not the person who in more traditional, not the actual professor, right? Not someone else look at it and be able to discern if something existed and to what degree it existed based on the language in the element. And that is so far down the rabbit hole, but we really do try to toggle the sort of big picture alignment and the very, very minutia of it.
The criteria really become the backbone of the whole project. So if they're not up to a level where they're usable, where they're clear enough and measurable enough and distinct enough to be usable, it throws a wrench into the whole process.
So and I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify, because I'm not sure that we made this, you know, really clear. In our assessment process, you know, we develop the outcomes, we develop the criteria, the assignments are developed by, you know, the Center for Learning Technology and the schools. When those artifacts come back to us and we're using them for program level assessment, we do not do any of the scoring. The scoring is done by outside subject matter experts who we hire for each individual assessment project. So we have to orient those people to the project, to the criteria that they're looking at, and then they're looking at the artifacts from a completely fresh perspective. They didn't assign the artifact. They didn't teach the class. They're completely on the outside of that. They just had the expertise in the area. So I just wanted to.
That's really helpful. I was going to say that you are all in from our perspective in teacher education, the enviable position of being able to work authentically with program owners, like your deans, your academic council, your mentors. We don't have that luxury in teacher preparation. It's one of the, outside of nursing, one of the most highly regulated undergraduate preparation types of programs in the whole country.
Right.
So there's a national accreditor right now who is the only one approved in our state that doesn't give us that kind of latitude. We have some flexibility within their box. They have a very lengthy set of accreditation guidelines, some of which tell us that most of our instruments need to be valid and reliable by scientific standards. So the minutiae you were talking about have become very prominent in their repertoire of what we must use. So we don't have philosophical objections to many of the instruments that we are able to use. We have some choice within the proprietary instruments, but you have to mount quite an effort to be able to meet that threshold scientifically to say that this is a valid instrument. So our EdTPA, which is a performance assessment created by Pearson, I'm sure as psychometricians, you've probably been very familiar with some of the controversy. No assessment in my experience has ever been uncontested territory. Right. I don't think I've met a test yet that people don't say, well, obviously there's always trade-offs in your instrument and your methodology and your sample. There's always trade-offs. I haven't met any instrument ever or any psychometrician ever who will say, oh yeah, that's perfect. It answers every question you had, or it answers this specific question perfectly, and it is the only one. So what I mean to say in making sure that Ashley and Vicki and I get the most value out of your session is that we don't have the luxury of inserting any more than a few or a minority of authentic measures that are created to answer our questions. And I don't know if you caught the opening session with Linda, but a good part of what she was talking about was being so purposeful and only measuring what counts. And I really wish we had that luxury, because I'd love to spend our faculties and my time as an administrator really measuring what we know. Measuring deeply what we know is very important and very informative, but I can't. I'm forced to, subject our candidates to all of these standardized tests in Praxis Core to come into the program, ACT or SAT, all of these standardized measurements along the way, these checkpoints and signature assignments, and these standardized performance assessments like test assessments like Praxis 2 licensure content exams, and their performance assessments on the exit from the program. So along the way, those checkpoints, we do have an opportunity to design signature assignments or authentic student work product that we can create rubrics, and we can do a lot of what you're talking about in setting an outcome. We don't call them criteria, we call them objectives. So there are learning objectives within this. So it's very, very similar concept. And then deciding, what are we actually measuring and coming at it with a fine-tooth comb. But the amount of time we have available to do that is constrained by the trade-off that we have no choice but to make in making sure that we look at all of these other measures from our sponsor, Watermark, who gives us a wonderful dispositional instrument that is valid and reliable when we use it as designed. So,
and it's not so much, I think to your point, and sort of, not necessarily thinking about the validated measures like the Praxis or any of those things, but then, so for your program, do you then internally have a way to sort of just like for your own purposes, or do you just sort of lean on those things? Because that's sort of what, for many of the things that you're right, we're allowed to, we are afforded the opportunity to be stuck in the clouds, which is sort of like, which is nice at times, and say like, well, we just want to know what our students are being able to achieve at the end of this program, whether it's an undergraduate program or a graduate program, and sort of like, well, how would we find that out? And then use that for accreditation purposes. And I think, like we had, and I don't want to skip ahead, but I want to make sure we get to a couple things.
Skip ahead.
Yeah, no, so, but like in the context of, we were going to use the BA as an example, because like I said, this conference was a teacher conference, and then they opened it up to other groups as well. We tried to sort of make like everybody has a BA, and sort of like how we think through it, going from what you call like, you know, that sort of like that level of proficiency to an actual rubric element that can be used. And that's the thing that we grapple with all the time, but we are then afforded that opportunity to sort of not manufacture. We can literally just go back in time and take those artifacts from a year ago and look at them again. So do you, I guess that's my question, do you then use those as sort of like your own self-evaluative piece as well? Or do you look at other assignments and other courses as well to sort of build that fuller picture?
Yeah, we definitely do both in the programs that are here at Stockton University. We use the authentic measures that come out of course assignments in real time. So we know with a candidate that candidate needs additional supports, or that candidate is just zipping along beautifully. And we know that in real time to be able to address the individual candidate. And then cumulatively at the end of a semester, we will have faculty review all of the outcomes, including the proprietary ones. So the proprietary ones also have a go, no go function. You know, if you don't have those Praxis core scores, you're not starting the first 50 hours of your program. And, you know, that's all there is to it. If your GPA falls down below the accredited threshold, you're not proceeding forward until you have done that other criteria in the program or raise that GPA back up to accreditation standards in our we have a group GPA.
We don't have anything like that. I'll let Mary, I mean, it's so interesting that, because we're looking back in time and very like, you know, those students have already graduated or not. And to sort of, you know, I would love to have the immediate impact on, because it is this very much elongated cycle of revision, which then comes back to hopefully improve student achievement in the aggregate, very not in the specific. And it's such a, you know, but yeah, no, it's, but I'll let Mary, go.
Yeah, I really, really understand the challenges coming out of education. I did my PhD in a school of education at the College of Education at Vanderbilt, and then I started my research career there. And it is a very heavy teacher education institution. So I really, really understand the heavily prescribed challenges of doing any kind of sort of, you know, ad hoc, you don't have time for it because the number of standardized tests that you are responsible for is just overwhelming. So I really, really understand that. And I also, you know, I moved from there to a much larger public university with a very decentralized faculty, and faculty simply had no interest in sort of sharing anything from their courses to allow for any kind of institution level examination of how well students were doing. So, I mean, wherever you are, the challenge for what your assessment can be versus what you would like it to be is, I feel it deep in my heart. So I hear you. And for us, we do have a number of those standardized measures, but we use all of the standardized tests and all of that. We only use at an institutional level for assessment. When it comes to the program level, we do stick with these assignment-based, course-based, you know, measures of how well students are doing. But as Mark said, you know, we look at it only in the aggregate. We don't have the ability to look at it in real time to identify students who may be struggling. So it's always well, you know, in this class that took place a year ago, it seems like students were not hitting this measure that we wanted students to hit. So we should make some changes now and hope that in the future, these future students do. But it's always too late to go back. And
no, I was going to say, so do you, because in sort of like just keeping an eye on the time, I wanted to ask you, do you keep a sense of when you, so these externally mandated metrics, do they have that level of specificity of a full rubric element like you see on the screen here? Or are they sort of, you know, you call them objectives, indicators, criterion, like above that, BA 3.6, right? Organization. That's what we want our students. And we just sort of drop that into the proficiency level and then fill it in around it. Do you have that flexibility in terms of like filling it around, or is it already specified to that degree?
So the EdTPA already is specified to that degree. There are ULRPs, these rubric progressions, basically, that we give to the candidates in their handbooks so that they can see how they will be scored. And it's a 1 to 4. Likewise, we use the Danielson teacher observation protocol for our supervisors, and that is also a reliable instrument because we do reliability norming sessions with our supervisors every semester before they begin, and we collect those data. So what we can do, what's wonderful about doing it real time though, is we can spot when there are issues right in real time. So if there's a new supervisor who's come on, we'll know early on, gosh, they needed to go through 6 or 7 different iterations before we were able to get a norming. So we keep a special eye on that particular supervisor. And most of the time they take to it and everything's fine. But sometimes it turns out that that supervisor is one that's having difficulties with candidates in the field because they're letting them fly by or they're being overly harsh. Whatever it was that we saw initially tends to bear itself out in the real world with that candidate. So when we go back and compare the two things in real time, we can call the supervisor in and we have those data from the reliability session to say, hey, we're noticing that even though we went through all of this, you and the candidate are still having a disagreement with the mentor about how well or not well the candidate is performing. So we can take remediation right there at the point of need without waiting for the archival data. That's not to say that it all gets caught, because occasionally there's a supervisor that doesn't flag, and occasionally the mentor is very low key and the candidate's very low key, and we don't see anything at all about it until later when the performance assessment gets failed. And then we start to see, when we look backwards, wow, they're inflated pretty heavily in the Danielson, and there's so it doesn't always work out, but
yeah, no, I mean, that's interesting. And do you feel like those, because we're jumping around, but I feel like it's okay. And if anybody else has jumped in, but I'm curious, because we struggle a lot with sort of the grade versus the score. Do you think that when you're norming those people that they see a difference? Right, because it is in real time, and those students are getting course level achievement scores based on those things as well. Do the people scoring have a discrete difference in their mind between this is a program level outcome, this is aggregated across all students, this is how we as an institution are serving our student body, versus this one student achieved this? I'm just curious if you see that difference, or if it's just like, it's okay in real time, we kind of just smush them together.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The people who look at the aggregate data are not the same people. The supervisors themselves will see the outcome of each round of reliability norming. So they'll see locally to their group content area expert, or if we have an aggregated group that might be, we only have a few preschool people lumped in together with elementary, so they can't really tell the difference. So they're only really seeing the expected norm of historical, because we do the norming based on video we took from the last semester. So they're seeing what they would score and what the institution average is from one semester back. So the question is, do they going forward then carry that impression? It's, they don't look at the whole institutional or the whole EPP, they just look at their own program. I'm not sure that it does influence them. I think they have a one-on-one relationship with their candidates.
Yeah.
And they tend to be very individualized. So grade inflation absolutely exists in our school.
Oh yeah, no, and it exists everywhere.
I think that's actually like one of the really important things, and I think, what Mark was referring to, the difference between scoring and grading, one of the things that we do in our process when we are preparing our subject matter experts to score artifacts for the purposes of program level assessment is we really drill the difference between a score and a grade. And we don't provide them with any information on what the students were instructed to do. We don't tell them what the assignment directions were, because we don't want them to get caught up in whether this assignment was done well. We want them to focus on whether the assignment reflects the criteria
Mhm.
that are associated with the outcome we're concerned with. And so that's
Uh,
a big challenge.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So
So
Go
Elizabeth
ahead.
does a lot of that.
yeah, I don't think we have examined that. So that's a really good point. I don't know the extent to which our because they're in the soup, our supervisors are able
Yeah.
to say, oh, well, put my other hat on, and I've been part of this scientific experiment to see when I hit reliability. We haven't studied that or looked at that closely, but that's a really good question. You know, it's a good thing to
Yeah.
examine.
Elizabeth can speak more to sort of how we do that.
Yeah, we really try to drive home that, and all the scores that our scores assign really don't affect the students whose work they're scoring. That students will not see feedback. It won't affect their GPA. What they're really doing is collecting scores for the school, so the school can make decisions moving forward to improve the curriculum. We really try to make sure they understand that because of grade inflation. And, you know, if they're reading something and they say, this criterion isn't here at all, this isn't fair, I'm marking the student proficient because they didn't do anything wrong. And that, you know, and then the school says, oh, they're proficient. So, you know, it really, we try to prevent that as much as we possibly can.
It's a really siloed, you know, there's two really important kinds of assessment, and they're really separated from each other. There's the assessment that takes place within the course, which is done by the mentor and affects the student's grade. And then there's the assessment that we do, and we really do try to keep them separate. So it, you know, it's a really different approach.
I apologize.
That's okay.
I'm getting used to hopping. So the other piece that I was curious, and we can speak to, you know, like, do you guys then layer? And I apologize, we're speaking with Claudine. I know a couple people, one more person hopped in.
Oh.
So, but you know, we're talking generally about sort of that alignment between the outcome, the individual criteria, and then the specific artifacts. Do you then have, Claudine, or anyone, do you have that opportunity to sort of create a map that looks like this, where you can go to individual courses and sort of say like, oh, I think this particular outcome would be found in this course, or this outcome, and not even to the criterion level. So I didn't mean to have you hop off, Claudine. I thought that was a great conversation, honestly. I looked at the people thing and I saw multiple people hop on, and I didn't want to feel like anyone was being excluded. With such a small number of people, I wanted to make sure everyone felt
Fairleigh
included.
Dickinson, we do a lot more than just that. We have tasks for each of our key tasks for each of our really important courses. We have an assessment coordinator, and each of the tasks have rubrics, which are broken down into criteria. And then for our CAPE annual report, every single criteria is rated. And then the mean is also rated for all courses, for every criteria, for every rubric. And then at the end of the year, that data with the means is presented to the faculty. And if any mean is below a 2.0, we then look at that specific criteria and say, how can we improve? So for instance, one area that we were constantly getting low on was strategies to address English language learners. And we beefed that up so that we're teaching strategies right within our class. What you're talking about more is program assessment, which is a great thing to do. I think what we do is more, we do both, we have to do both, but we do much more course assessment. Oh, and that's the timer for you.
Yeah.
That's the timer for left.
No, that's really great, Vicki. I appreciate that. The sort of level of specificity to the course and the artifact, and sort of mapping that to all the way up. You know, our office sort of ends at the program, but it's certainly at the course level, and sort of appreciating that the assessment continues all the way down to that very specific, you know,
so
artifact element.
I'll mention one other thing. I was instrumental many years ago. Now there's a whole consortium universities that belong to something called the Clinical Competency Inventory, which is directly aligned to the in-task standards. Supervisors are trained on it. There's about 8 different universities or teacher training programs that now belong. And that's why we also disaggregate that data so we can tell in real time how students are doing, and we have information on all 11 of the in-task standards for reporting to CAPE. So I don't know if anybody else has questions, because we now have 4 minutes left for.
Yeah, I was just looking. Does anyone else? I'm looking in the chat as well. Anyone? Feel free to unmute yourself. I know a few people hopped on at the end. Feel free to hop in. The Elizabeth or Mary, did we have any that it's not liking my ability to move?
Not wanting you to move ahead?
No, I was not. There we go.
No, so I would clarify. I mean, obviously, our process for determining what an entire academic program looks like does include all of the minutiae down to the assignments and the rubrics for the assignments. It's just that at our level, the Office of Learning Outcomes, the focus of assessment here is at the program level and the institutional level. So that, you know, that's just a difference in focus and a little bit of, you know, governance.
Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, and there's no question that our unique sort of student structure plays into that as well. In sort of like doing that real-time feedback just isn't possible at Thomas Edison, frankly. But it sort of like opens up other doors of opportunities where without any sort of, you know, restriction, we can go back and look at 3 years because everything is sort of captured. So artifacts, we can sort of decide like, oh, what would that artifact have looked like 3 years ago? And we can capture that very easily. So Elizabeth, Mary, any other questions, concerns, anything?
No, I think that one of the major differences, you know, between various programs is whether there are external standards to which you need to pay very close attention and that you need to meet within your program outcomes. And with most of our education programs, we have very similar challenges to, you know, what Claudine was speaking to earlier, in terms of really very closely prescribed outcomes, criteria, et cetera. And in those cases, you know, we do very much identify with the challenge of you know,
our nursing programs. Our nursing programs are very similar. The nursing programs have very similar sort of clear constraints, and then we have other programs where literally, as Claudine, the assistant deans are literally writing the outcomes. They're like, hey, we need, how many should we have? 4, 5, 6? It's like, it's that nebulous. So sort of coming to each of those extremes. But anyway.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have any concluding remarks, because you have 1 minute left.
Nah, I don't.
No, we're good.
Assessment's hard. Welcome.
Yeah, we do. Does anyone else have any? I'm looking at the. Claudine, you have any other questions, concerns?
No, you guys are terrific. You know, I wish we had, you know, a team of qualified assessment professionals to help. You know, I'm just a poser, and we do the best we can to get it all.
Hardly. I would. I mean, I
not at all.
Self-deprecating aside, I'm sure that's not true. It's really, it is absolutely true though. Like, you know, the three of us really just think about all of this all the time. Now we do it across the entire university, but we aren't stuck in a particular course or even a program we're toggling between the MBA and the nursing Bachelor of Arts, and or all of those things at the same time. So then we can sort of be like, well, what's the difference between this reliability and this validity, and how would we ascertain to know the best results? So, but thank you very much for everyone's attention. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'll see everyone later.
And thank you for an excellent discussion. It's greatly appreciated.